The moment I walked onto that stage, I knew it wasn't going to be an ordinary debate. The atmosphere in the studio already felt electric, almost like the air was waiting to catch fire. The producers were smiling, the audience buzzing, but deep down, I sensed what was about to unfold. When Piers Morgan and Candace Owens sit across from each other, sparks aren't just expected, they're inevitable. What happened on Loose Women wasn't just a casual disagreement. It was raw, unfiltered confrontation, the kind of clash that leaves a mark long after the cameras stop rolling. Piers came in with his usual force, sharp words, pointed questions, and that relentless ability to cut right into the heart of an issue. He thrives on challenging people, especially strong personalities who refuse to bend. And Candace? She's not someone who bows to anyone's pressure. She walked in unshaken, eyes steady, voice powerful, prepared to go toe-to-toe with anyone who tried to corner her. The moment their eyes met, you could almost hear the tension before a single word was spoken. The debate started controlled, even civil at first. But the more topics they touched, the hotter the temperature in that room became. Politics, culture, freedom of speech, it was like stacking dry wood higher and higher, waiting for the match. Piers pressed, Candace pushed back harder. He accused, she countered. Every exchange felt like a heavyweight match where neither fighter wanted to give even an inch. And the audience could feel it. Gasps, nervous laughter, scattered applause, it was all feeding into the fire that was now raging on stage. At one point, Piers leaned in, voice raised, cutting through the panel with the kind of dominance he's known for. But Candace didn't flinch. She raised her voice higher, sharper, filled with conviction that drowned out his interruptions. She wouldn't let him bulldoze her. In fact, it seemed like the more he tried, the more determined she became to stand her ground. It was gripping to watch, two powerful voices colliding, neither backing down, both fighting not just for their opinion but for dominance in the room. The clash wasn't just about words, it was about presence. Piers has that larger-than-life energy, the confidence of years in front of the camera. But Candace brought a kind of fearless fire that made even him look unsettled. When she called him out directly, challenging not just his arguments but his motives, the studio fell into a stunned silence. For a moment, it didn't feel like television. It felt like a storm ripping through, uncontrolled and unstoppable. By then, the panel around them was powerless. The hosts tried to mediate, tried to cool things down, but their voices were drowned out by the force of Piers and Candace clashing. The audience was caught between shock and fascination, watching history unfold live. Every second was unpredictable, every comeback sharper than the last. You could feel that the situation was spiraling, slipping away from anything resembling control. And then, the breaking point. Piers, visibly frustrated, leaned back with that unmistakable mix of anger and disbelief. Candace, unwavering, delivered a final line that hit like a knockout punch. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, some booed, but the energy was overwhelming. Producers rushed in, trying to diffuse the chaos, but the damage was done. In a move no one expected, Piers was asked to leave. The man who built his career on never walking away, on always pushing harder, was suddenly escorted out. The studio was left in stunned silence. Candace sat there calm, steady, victorious in her own way, while the panel scrambled to recover. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or sit in shock. It was a television moment that felt bigger than television, a moment where personalities, egos, and convictions clashed so violently that the show itself couldn't contain it. Afterwards, the world outside exploded just as fiercely. Social media lit up within seconds. Clips spread like wildfire, headlines broke, and everyone had an opinion. Some praised Candace for standing her ground, finally giving Piers a taste of his own medicine. Others defended Piers, calling him brave for asking the tough questions. But nobody stayed silent. The clash divided audiences, sparked arguments in living rooms, and dominated timelines everywhere. Looking back, it wasn't just a heated argument, it was a cultural moment. It exposed the fault lines in our debates today, the way people demand to be heard, the refusal to be silenced. It showed what happens when unstoppable force meets immovable object. Piers Morgan and Candace Owens didn't just debate, they collided. And the aftermath will be talked about for a long time to come. Because what people witnessed wasn't scripted, it wasn't polished, it was raw, human, and unapologetically real. It was the kind of clash that reminds us why these conversations matter, why voices collide, and why sometimes, the most explosive moments reveal the deepest truths. That night on Loose Women, nobody really walked away as the clear winner. But everybody watching knew they had just witnessed something unforgettable. The moment Piers Morgan and Candace Owens sat across from each other, the air in the room changed. Everyone knew this wasn't going to be polite chatter. It was bound to turn controversial, because both of them carry reputations that thrive on speaking raw, unfiltered truths, no matter how uncomfortable those truths might sound. And as soon as the first question was thrown onto the table, the audience realized they weren't just watching a discussion, they were watching a battle of worldviews. Piers started in classic fashion, direct and cutting, pointing out contradictions in Candace's views, pressing her to answer with precision. He wasn't there to let her glide through sound bites. He wanted to corner her, to challenge her authority, and to make her defend every word. That's the way he's built his career, confronting people with a kind of relentless persistence that often makes them stumble. But Candace isn't someone who stumbles easily. She's built for confrontation. With fire in her voice and confidence in her eyes, she countered every jab with a sharper one of her own. The clash intensified as they waded deeper into politics and culture. Piers accused her of oversimplifying issues, of dismissing nuances that couldn't be ignored. Candace fired back, accusing him of twisting narratives, of speaking from a place of arrogance rather than truth. Every time he tried to cut her off, she cut right back, refusing to be silenced or overshadowed. Their words weren't just arguments, they were weapons, thrown with precision and passion, each one raising the stakes higher. The audience sat on the edge of their seats. Some gasped, some clapped, others just stared wide-eyed, because what they were witnessing didn't feel like typical TV debate. It felt raw, unpredictable, almost dangerous. The panel tried to mediate, tried to keep things flowing smoothly, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave. The more they spoke, the more intense the energy became. You could feel the tension ripple through the studio like electricity. At one explosive moment, Piers leaned forward, voice booming, pressing Candace on one of her most controversial takes. He wanted her to back down, to soften, maybe even to admit she'd gone too far. But instead, she doubled down. Her tone grew sharper, her words more defiant. She called him out directly, accusing him of being part of the very media culture he often criticizes. The studio fell into stunned silence. For a second, even Piers looked rattled, caught off guard by the blunt force of her attack. This was no longer just about exchanging opinions, it had become personal. The intensity between them was undeniable, a collision of egos and beliefs, each refusing to yield. And while the panel tried to keep the peace, the show's structure was breaking apart under the weight of their clash. It was no longer loose women, it was a showdown between two titans who had no intention of letting the other walk away with the last word. The controversy grew with every passing second. Some in the audience cheered Candace for refusing to let Piers bulldoze her. Others shook their heads, convinced she was being reckless and disrespectful. The division was clear, even in the room itself. And when Piers finally snapped back with a line meant to shut her down, Candace returned fire with a response so sharp it cut through the tension like lightning. That was the moment the debate tipped from heated into explosive. By then, the producers were scrambling. This wasn't the kind of exchange you could neatly wrap up and move on from. This was messy, loud, emotional, and deeply controversial. And that's exactly why it was so gripping. Viewers at home weren't just watching two people argue, they were witnessing a cultural collision, a mirror of the debates happening across living rooms, social media feeds, and political arenas everywhere. When the segment finally ended, there was no sense of resolution. Piers sat with that familiar glare of frustration, while Candace leaned back with a look of satisfaction that said she wasn't intimidated, not even for a second. The audience was buzzing, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or just breathe again. And once the camera stopped rolling, the aftermath began immediately. Clips hit the internet within minutes, headlines exploded across platforms, and the public picked sides faster than the show's panel could even process what had just happened. Some praised Piers for daring to confront her, for not allowing controversial opinions to pass unchallenged. Others celebrated Candace for standing firm, for refusing to bend under pressure from one of the most relentless interviewers in the game. But what no one could deny was that the exchange had struck a nerve. It wasn't just entertainment, it was a snapshot of the polarized world we live in, where every argument becomes a cultural battlefield, and every word carries the weight of millions of opinions. That's why this controversial exchange will be remembered. Not because of who won, but because of what it revealed. It showed that in today's world, debates aren't about reaching agreement, they're about refusing to be silenced. They're about clashing worldviews colliding in real time, raw and unfiltered, for everyone to see. And when those worldviews belong to Piers Morgan and Candace Owens, the result isn't just conversation, it's combustion. People will argue for weeks about who came out on top, but the truth is, the real power of that moment was the controversy itself. It pulled people in, kept them hooked, and made them feel something. And that's what unforgettable television does. It doesn't give you neat answers. It leaves you shaken, divided, and desperately wanting more. The uproar didn't start slowly, it erupted. The set of loose women, usually filled with lively chatter and laughter, turned into a battleground the moment Piers Morgan and Candace Owens locked horns. At first, it seemed like another fiery conversation, but what unfolded went far beyond spirited debate. It was a storm of clashing egos, bold statements, and unrelenting energy that left the audience stunned and the producers scrambling. Piers entered with his trademark force, his voice cutting through the air with precision, determined to put Candace on the spot. He thrives in conflict, always pushing for the sharpest response, the most controversial admission. But Candace met him with equal fire. She wasn't intimidated by his reputation, nor did she waver under his relentless pressure. She hit back with confidence, every word delivered with the kind of conviction that demands to be heard. The air grew thick with tension, the audience holding its breath as the exchange escalated. What made the uproar so explosive was how quickly it spiraled out of control. Neither side was willing to back down. Piers accused, Candace countered. He raised his voice, she raised hers louder. The hosts tried to steer the conversation, but their efforts were drowned in the intensity of two strong personalities colliding. Every line spoken felt heavier, sharper, as though the entire show was teetering on the edge of chaos. The audience's reactions only fueled the storm. Gasps, scattered applause, even boos rippled through the studio. Viewers weren't just watching a TV segment, they were witnessing a moment that felt unpredictable, raw, and dangerously real. The studio's usual rhythm broke apart, replaced by an energy so fierce that it left even the panel struggling to regain control. This wasn't just a debate, it was an uproar, one that could no longer be contained by the format of daytime television. At one point, Piers leaned forward, his tone sharper than ever, determined to dominate the conversation. But Candace didn't flinch. Instead, she doubled down, her words slicing through his with unwavering confidence. Her voice carried above the noise, her defiance electrifying the audience. The panel sat frozen, watching two forces collide in a way no one could stop. The uproar grew louder, the atmosphere charged with the kind of intensity that television rarely captures. What pushed the moment over the edge was how personal it began to feel. This wasn't just about policy, culture, or politics, it was about pride, authority, and the refusal to be silenced. Piers, known for controlling conversations, suddenly found himself challenged in ways he hadn't expected. Candace seized the moment, turning the confrontation into a statement of her own power. The crowd erupted again, split between shock and admiration, as the uproar reached its peak. Behind the cameras, producers were in chaos. This wasn't the light-hearted daytime segment they had planned, it had become a spectacle. The clash had grown so volatile that intervention seemed inevitable. And then, in a move nobody predicted, the situation hit breaking point. The uproar became so overwhelming that the show could no longer carry on as usual. What had started as a lively discussion had exploded into a moment of live television history. When it was over, the studio was left in stunned silence. Piers, visibly frustrated, walked away with the weight of defeat hanging in the air. Candace sat firm, unshaken, her expression one of victory and resilience. The panel tried to recover, but the uproar had already redefined the moment. It wasn't just another episode, it was a clash that people would replay, dissect, and debate for days. The aftermath was immediate and massive. Social media erupted within minutes, clips spreading like wildfire, hashtags trending across platforms. Some praised Candace for refusing to bow to Piers' aggressive style. Others defended Piers, arguing that he had exposed her contradictions. But no one stayed silent. The uproar spilled from the studio into living rooms, offices, and online communities around the world. Everyone had an opinion, and everyone wanted to be heard. What made this uproar unforgettable was how it exposed something deeper than the argument itself. It wasn't just about the issues, they almost faded into the background. It was about the clash of personalities, the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object. It was about what happens when two voices refuse to bend, when conviction collides with conviction in a storm that can't be calmed. The Loose Women set became the stage for a cultural drama far bigger than the show itself. Looking back, it's clear why people couldn't look away. The uproar was messy, unpredictable, and utterly human. It reminded us that debates aren't neat or polite when the stakes are high. They're loud, emotional, and divisive. And in a world where so much feels scripted and controlled, watching something so raw unfold in real time felt electrifying. The uproar on Loose Women won't just be remembered as a heated moment between Piers Morgan and Candace Owens. It will be remembered as a cultural flashpoint, a moment where daytime television became the stage for something bigger than itself. It will be remembered as the day when control was lost, voices clashed without filter, and the world stopped to watch two powerful figures refuse to step aside. And that's why it will echo far beyond the studio, living on in headlines, feeds, and conversations for a long time to come. The moment the clash between Piers Morgan and Candace Owens hit the airwaves, the reaction was instant. It didn't take hours or even minutes. Within seconds of the heated exchange, the public erupted. Clips were clipped, tweets were fired, and debates spilled across living rooms, office spaces, and social feeds everywhere. The studio audience had already felt the shockwaves, but what happened outside those walls was even bigger. The uproar became a global conversation, and suddenly everyone had something to say. For Piers supporters, the incident was proof that he was still the fearless voice who asks the tough questions. They praised his refusal to back down, applauding him for challenging Candace on controversial views. Social media posts painted him as a defender of truth, someone who wasn't afraid to confront polarizing figures head-on, no matter how loud the backlash might be. Hashtags bearing his name trended, and loyal fans rushed to his defense with fiery posts of their own. But Candace's supporters weren't silent either. In fact, they came out with equal, if not greater, intensity. To them, she had done what so many couldn't, stood up to Piers Morgan and refused to let him bulldoze the conversation. She was hailed as fearless, unshakable, a woman who wouldn't bend under pressure. Clips of her fiery comebacks went viral, replayed again and again, celebrated as moments of triumph. People admired her confidence, her refusal to be silenced, and the sheer strength of her presence. For every headline praising Piers, there was another hailing Candace as the clear victor. The divide was sharp, and that's what made the reaction so explosive. Families debated it at dinner tables. Office colleagues argued about who had won. Online communities fractured into camps, each side certain that their champion had crushed the other. It wasn't just about the clash, it was about what the clash represented. Piers symbolized one kind of authority, Candace another, and people were projecting their own beliefs onto the battlefield they had created on loose women. News outlets wasted no time capitalizing on the storm. Headlines blared about the explosive clash and on-air meltdown. Talk shows replayed the confrontation, dissecting every word, every look, every interruption. Analysts weighed in, celebrities shared their takes, and the moment snowballed into something far larger than the original broadcast. It became a cultural lightning rod, and no one wanted to be left out of the conversation. The public reaction wasn't just loud, it was emotional. Some people expressed outrage, saying the clash had crossed a line, that it was disrespectful, chaotic, and damaging to public discourse. Others celebrated it as a raw, authentic moment in an era where too much feels staged and polished. The clash gave people something real, something unpredictable, and whether they loved it or hated it, they couldn't stop talking about it. That's why the reaction kept building, wave after wave, spreading far beyond the show itself. Memes flooded the internet, turning sharp one-liners into viral jokes. Fan edits appeared on TikTok and Instagram, some framing Piers as the unshakable anchor, others casting Candace as the unbreakable warrior. Every platform had its own version of the story, but the common thread was clear: people were captivated. The public couldn't look away, and that's what made the reaction so powerful. What fueled the fire even more was how both Piers and Candace doubled down afterward. Neither backed down, neither softened their words. Their post-clash interviews, tweets, and statements only amplified the noise. Instead of fading, the controversy deepened. Supporters became more loyal, critics became more vocal, and the line between both camps grew sharper. It wasn't just a television moment anymore, it was a cultural moment, and everyone felt the need to pick a side. The beauty and the chaos of the reaction was that there was no middle ground. Very few people shrugged and said, "It was fine." No, this was the kind of clash that demanded an emotional response. People either loved it or hated it, admired the strength or condemned the chaos. And that's exactly why it dominated headlines and timelines. It struck at something deeper than television. It struck at identity, values, and the need to defend one's worldview. In the weeks that followed, the eruption didn't die down. Articles continued to pour out, video views skyrocketed, and debates carried on. Even people who hadn't seen the original broadcast felt pulled into the storm because the reaction was impossible to ignore. It became a shared cultural reference point, something that defined conversation across borders and communities. Everyone wanted to weigh in, and everyone wanted to claim their voice in the uproar. The public reaction erupting the way it did proved one thing: people crave moments that break the mold. They crave unpredictability, raw emotion, and the thrill of watching something unscripted spiral out of control. And when those moments happen, they spread like wildfire, fueled by division, passion, and the power of opinion. Piers Morgan and Candace Owens gave the world that moment, and the public responded exactly as expected, with intensity, with passion, and with voices that refused to be quiet. In the end, the real story wasn't about who won or lost. The real story was the reaction itself. Because when the public erupts like that, it shows just how powerful a single moment can be. It shows that people are still hungry for debate, for drama, for authenticity, even if it comes wrapped in controversy. And that's why this clash will be remembered, not just for the words spoken on stage, but for the firestorm it unleashed across the world.